Hello, everyone, and welcome to a short video where I will be showing you how we're going to take notes during the R module and how you are going to complete your assignments as well. And it's all through this concept, this platform called Quarto in R, which is going to be a QMD file, so a .qmd. So let's go ahead and look at how we create a QMD file first. So I'm in my R studio here. I already have a bunch of documents pulled up that I will go through in a moment. But to start a new Quarto file, we can go to File, New File. Instead of just a regular R script, I'm going to go to a Quarto document. And I can specify a title. So maybe I am working on a homework assignment. I can add my name there. And I want the output to be, we'll talk about this, but I want the output to be a HTML document. And we can create, and it auto-populates a document for us. So let's actually learn some more, a bit behind the scenes about what's going on and what is Quarto exactly. So to do that, we are in the 3.2 visualizations page, and I'm going to click on the slides link. So what is Quarto? Quarto is actually a open source scientific publishing system, and it's built on some system in the back end called Pandoc. So what that means is that we can kind of weave together, we can combine both code and regular text into a single document and output that into a variety of sources. So I can make a website, I can make a document, I can make slides. These slides that I'm showing you right now were made from a Quarto document. And Quarto is kind of the second generation of a similar thing called R Markdown, and I'm deciding to teach you the newer version rather than going for the older version, which is R Markdown. And like I said, we are going to be able to create lots and lots of different kinds of output because of this Quarto system. So what's kind of going on here? There is kind of a fun picture of it, is that we have some different pieces. So there's a YAML piece, there's Quarto, this kind of converts it via knitter, and then we output a Pandoc document, which gives us our final output. So then there is a more technical version, but only thing that we're going to focus on is the QMD aspect and then how I want the output to be. So whether I want it to be an HTML file or a slides, we're going to be working with HTML files. So this is the kind of back end. I'm not even totally sure exactly what goes on behind the scenes there. So we're just going to focus on how we actually structure our documents. So why Quarto instead of the first version? So why version 2 instead of version 1? This is because it is kind of the newer version and it is going to be built out a lot. So I'm hoping that after learning this and getting a lot of practice with this in this class, you guys can use this in your careers. It's going to be very, very popular in data science fields. A lot of companies, a lot of industries are using Quarto to collaborate across different departments. And that's a big piece, is collaborating. So a lot of people don't exclusively use R. So that's what we're going to focus on. But Quarto can be used with other languages. So maybe you're working with a machine learning team and they are working in Python. You can combine Python code and R code into the same project and have that work seamlessly together via Quarto. So it makes research a lot more reproducible. It makes it a lot more reusable. And we're going to work hard to be lazy. So we can use Quarto to kind of simplify how we make our reports. So this requires a bit of a change in kind of our mental model of how we're typically thinking, especially with how we have done things in Excel and Tableau, where our source, picture this as an Excel file, is the exact same thing as the output. So you're doing everything manually. Everything is kind of point and click, manually recreation. And what you're working in is the exact same thing as the final output, right? This leads to having to copy and paste a bunch of stuff and worrying about how you recreated something, how you can redo it again if you needed to. Or if the data changes, right, then you have to kind of look at specifically each part and you need to rerun the entire analyses, right? This is kind of the current state of how we have been working through things. But we're going to change that now. And we're going to have two different things. We're going to have our source document and we're going to have our output document. So our source document, this is what we're going to be working with in RStudio. And the output, this is going to be an HTML file that is going to be a nicely formatted output. So here's an example. So here's some code, just simple code. It's going to create a plot. It has some YAML, which we'll talk about what that means, and creates a plot, has some titles, and has a cross-reference. And this is how nice it looks in the output. So we're using this source document. This is where we're going to do all of our work. And we're going to code this to look very nice in the output. So kind of two different separate pieces now. But the idea is that by making the source document nice and by making the source document well formatted, then changing the data, changing the analyses are going to be really simple. We just have to kind of re-render this document, and everything gets taken care of in terms of the output. So we're going to be using this in RStudio. So that's what we have here. We're working in RStudio to use our QMD files. But when you start collaborating with other people outside of this class, then you can also use Quarto in Jupyter notebooks. So I've not personally used these, but Python users use a lot of Jupyter notebooks and a lot of other platforms as well. Quarto is available. So it's going to be very useful for you to learn this one platform and apply it to lots of different areas as you move forward in your academic and professional career. So let's take a look at what the two different ways that we can edit a Quarto document are. So there's either the source or the visual editor. And the source one looks more like code. So we see we have a bunch of hashtags and we have our code there and we have some HTML options in there. Whereas the source, the visual editor kind of already looks like the output. It already looks like how the rendered version is going to look. So to change that in your RStudio, all you have to do is click the visual up here versus the source. So for the visual editor, right, it kind of already looks like a nicely formatted. This is how it's going to look. I personally prefer the source document. I have a bit more control over how things look, and I think it's easier to work with, especially it'll help you get better with kind of behind the scenes, what's going on. But in terms of the visual editor, it's very easy to input anything. So the special key to input anything is going to be the /. So let's say I need to add a code chunk, just / code chunk. It adds it in right there. / I want to add a bulleted list. It gives me a bulleted list. So item 1, I can tab over, right, just like I'm working in Word, and sub item 1, enter, and so on. If I want to enter in a heading, but I want it to be a smaller heading, I can do that. And then behind the scenes, here's what these look like. So the source, I added my code chunk. So it's 3 backticks followed by the language R, and then we close it with 3 backticks. And then here's the bulleted list, what it looks like. I indent over 4 spaces to get the sub item, and headings are prefaced by hashtags. So the smaller headings get more hashtags. So these ones have 2 bigger headings. If I want to bold, I use 2 asterisks. If I want to link, I can do greater than and less than, close those around my link. Again, in the visual editor, they just look like how they're going to appear in the end. So that's the difference between the visual editor and the source editor. So what are the different pieces that I've been mentioning? So we have 3 different pieces of a Quarto document. The first one is the YAML. So YAML is YAML. This is like the preface. It's how Quarto is going to make your document. So this is all of it's called metadata. This is all of the information that Quarto needs in terms of how to render, how to output your document. And then we have code chunks, and then we have just regular plain text. So let's dive into these 3 pieces a little bit more. So the YAML, these can get really, really complex, but we're just going to keep it simple. So I will show you a few different ones, a few different options. So very basic ones that we're going to start with is the title of the document. So YAML always starts with 3 lines and is closed with 3 lines. So if you notice in all of these, whether I'm in the source or the visual, there's 3 lines, all of my options. The spacing is important, so how far I tab over is really important in YAML. And close my 3 lines. This is all of that preface information that Quarto needs behind the scenes. So I tell it the title, I tell it who wrote it, I tell it the date, and then here is when the formatting is important. So I have 2 spaces over. My format of the document is going to be an HTML document. And then next comes all the options for this HTML document. So code fold, I can set that to true. So let's actually show you what that does. So I am in this document here, and I have a few different code chunks, and I'll show you how this renders right now. So to save this document, I can save this right now, put it on my desktop, and I'll just say demo. So to render, which means to make the output, you just click this render button. And currently it looks like this. So I have the title, I have the author, I have my headings, I have the link, and then I have my code chunks. If I specify the option code fold equals true, and then render that, looks like I need to fix the spacing a bit. So I'm going to do HTML down here, and then do that. Try it one more time. There we go. So now if you look at the code chunk here, it has a bullet and an option to click it. So it folded the code. So this is really nice to kind of format your code. If you don't want by default everything to be showing, you want the user to be able to click through the code if they want to. That is going to be a really neat option for us. And you can kind of set that globally up here. The other option that I have written out here is going to be important for us is called embed resources. So let's take a look at what this does. So all of our note files and all of our homework starters. So here is a starter file for the notes. It also has embed resources. It also has table of contents, so feel free to mess with TOC, table of contents, where you want to put the table of contents. And all of the homework starter files have this embed resources. So let's take a look at what that does. So when I am in this folder, so I'm in my visualization starter document right now, and how you're going to take notes in this class is you can pull up the interactive tutorials. So the interactive tutorials are going to be how the lecture videos are made. And there's 2 ways that you can take notes. The first way is going to be coding in the boxes here that you'll see. So as I'm working through the videos, right, I would have my dual screens up. I would have my tutorial on one screen and my video on the other screen. And I would be coding alongside with me in each of these different boxes so that you can practice how to do these functions, how to do the code. So for example, I would do again, we'll learn what all of this means, but if I want to make a quick scatter plot, you can run this code in the document, or your second option is to use the starter file and code alongside in here. And the advantage of this is you can actually render and create your own personalized notes document. So if I want to create this plot, geom point, so I'm going to add some code here. And let's say I said, professor said need to have statements in AES. So this is something that we'll learn, but maybe I have a note here, like whenever I take notes, I always have a bunch of bulleted lists. So don't forget the data argument, right? Maybe these are some key points from the notes. And if I want to render this document now, I can render it. And what it's doing behind the scenes is going through all of these different code chunks, and it is running those, kind of putting it all together. And then we output. Here's my table of contents. So I have it already sectioned out for us. So the example data set is the first section. And then we have a few more sections, some subsections. I have the exercises already in here so that you can code those up. But here is your personalized notes along with the code that goes with it. So if I was in this class, I would be working through the video and working alongside in my starter file so that I have my own personalized notes. But let's take a look what happened behind the scenes. So when I render that document, I have an HTML file that was output and also two folders that were made. So these files are used to create the HTML document. But I'm going to go ahead and delete these and show you what happens when I change this embed resources to true. So when I change that to true and re-render this, this is how we are going to be submitting all of our homework files via Canvas, is the embed resources. So what that does is now I have my same output document. So the same output document, but behind the scenes, it embedded those files. So those previous folders are kind of embedded into this HTML file. It's an embedded HTML file now. So this HTML file has everything I need in order for you to submit it through Canvas. I am able to view that without depending on other files, other folders. So we can think of this as kind of like that package Tableau workbook, and we can share and send these HTML files just like any Excel file that we have done before. So that's how we're going to use Quarto in our class. Let's take a look at the rest of the slides here. So next up is the code chunks. So how the code chunks work, I already mentioned this, but you preface these with 3 backticks, and then the language, we're all going to be working in R, but you could have Python there or Julia, right? Different coding languages like that. There's a few different options, so we can add labels to the code chunks. So this is helpful because if I label it, there's 2 ways. You can label example. If I notice down here in my chunk 2, it gave me a label for it. So it's helpful for kind of navigating your document, especially when they get quite long, like the notes are. And you can click to, so let's say I need to go to chunk 7. I can just quickly go there. If I have a label, I know what is in chunk 7. You can also specify it after the R. You can do label, and then next comes your options. So if I put a comma there, this is when I have my options. So you can cache, which means that you're going to save the results in a file so it doesn't have to rerun the code. You can echo. So echo equals true means that the code is hidden, but the output shows. Eval equals false. That means it doesn't run the code. And yeah, so there's a few different options there. And then to run the code chunk, you can do this plus button. So I'll load my library first. You can run the code chunk like this, and it will either output down here, or you can make it set to output down here in your viewer. You can also run everything above it. So run all code chunks above. Maybe you need to load the data and then eventually get your plot, you can do that. And then we end our code chunk with code delimiters. And here are the different options, so feel free to mess with those to kind of clean up your output to see how they look. Again, there is another example. Last item to talk about is the markup text. So we already kind of mentioned some of this stuff, but when there is the plain text, that is kind of how you explain, that's when you write about what the code is doing. And that's when you write about kind of your explanations, your write-ups will all be in plain text rather than in an R script having them in comments. So I want to see the write-ups in plain text, kind of written in paragraph or in bullet form. And that is just anything outside of the code chunks. And I mentioned all of the other formatting, like the bolding, the heading, all of that kind of stuff, either in the visual or the source editor. And we can also cross-reference. So if you notice here, my table is labeled TBL flippers. If I have an @ sign and then TBL flippers, it renders as a link. So if I were to click table 1 here, it takes me exactly to table 1. So I don't have to worry about the labeling. I don't have to worry about the numbering, and it automatically takes me there. We can do that with figures as well. So here my figure is called fig plot. And when I reference this, said C @ fig plot, it renders as C figure 1. So if I were to reference maybe an equation that's way above, I can set C equation. And then when I click that, it's going to take me in the document where that equation is. So very, very useful, especially in kind of research documents. Here's the different markdown syntax. So 1 asterisk for italics, 2 for bold. When you want code to show up exactly, you just put it in backticks. And then here's how it outputs. Here's the different headers. And then the very last thing here is inline code. So this is very, very useful, especially when copy and paste errors, changing data, right, stuff like that. You can actually run you can run code in your markdown text and have it evaluate so that you don't have to manually copy and paste output values whenever data changes. So for this example, it outputs as there's 344 rows, whereas in the source, it is actually running code. So I put backticks R for the language to tell it to evaluate this. And then it's going to run the command n row of the data set. And it renders as 344 in the Penguins data set. And that's just formatted. So very, very useful technique, especially if you are, say, running a regression and you want to get the correlation, but you don't want to manually copy the correlation. You said the correlation is equal to, you run the code, output the correlation, and then continue on with your sentence. So very, very useful technique that we can take advantage in some of our write-ups. Then we already talked about rendering. There's stuff going on behind the scenes that you can dig into if you would like, but we don't have to worry about all of that. So that is a brief introduction to Quarto. So hopefully that explains how you will be working with the documents that I have provided through this course, and I'll see you in the next video.